doing book talk. So first thing that's really important is that you have to hold the book. Students need to be able to see the book that you are talking about. So today I'm going to be doing this book here, one of my favorite ones called The Sound of Silence. I'll be modeling it, but the important thing to always start with is that you should have the book in your hands. Not just because it's important for you to hold it, but because students need to be able to see it. I know we talk a lot about in life not judging a book by its cover, but Linda Rief even pulled, the point that, or she made the point that a lot of students do read books or pick up a book originally because of the cover. And so hopefully the book you're reading has a decently cool looking cover. It's important to have it in your hands as you're book talking so students can see it, they can look at it, and if it's a book that they want, they can remember what it looks like and they can pick it up later. So holding the book is important. You need to know the book. And remember that knowing the book doesn't necessarily mean that you've read it. Knowing the book could mean that you, for example, read a blog about it. So perhaps you didn't actually read the book, but it's good to be clear about, I didn't read this book, to be perfectly honest with you, but I did look to my trusted source at such and such blog, and this is what they had to say about the book. And I'd like to read a section from what they think was an important segment of the book. Again, you could also say, I didn't read this book, but Mr. Campbell read this book, and he could not stop raving about this book. And he told me everything I need to know about this book. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what I understand this book to be, because it really made me think about a bunch of you in this class. And so again, you don't need to have read the book, but you need to know the book. You need to understand what makes this book good based on either your own experience or other people's passionate experiences as they describe it. It's also incredibly important that you read a short passage. You need to read something from the book so that students can appreciate the language from it. They need to be able to understand, is this something where the author is writing in a language that I appreciate? Is it something that's super descriptive? If it's sci-fi, how are they using that language to talk about these things that might be unfamiliar? If it's a romance novel, how cheesy is the language in here? Is it, if you like cheesy, cheesy could be good. So choosing a passage helps the reader understand as well just what the author, just had their writing style and if it's going to work for them. And then you want to keep records. So in the classroom, I would model where you would write on the board, this is the book that we book talked on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And usually I would just erase that and then start from scratch the next week. The reason why we keep records, and some people like to keep a giant whiteboard just for this, for the entire school year, is because they want to see, they may not remember which book cover it was, but they remember it was kind of like this, and they may not have even remembered the title of the book, but they remember the book afterwards, the Thursday book that they didn't want to read, but they remember it came after the Wednesday book that they did want to read. And so keeping a record either on the whiteboard, which is where I would keep it, perhaps you have a separate piece of paper or an anchor chart somewhere in your classroom so that students have a reference point for going back and saying, that's the book that I want to read. And then accepting help is super important as well. That sort of goes back to knowing the book. And so sometimes you need friends who read, you need students to give you advice. And so being able to accept help, you may even have students step in and say, has anybody else read this book? Could you tell me a little bit if I'm off base with my understanding or my summary of this? Can anybody clarify this? So getting help from both students and from people who you trust to give you book advice is important. And just again, remember how important you are. Some students will read a book because it gets the blessing of a teacher who they love, who they so deeply appreciate as a teacher who reads and who gets them. And so just remember how important you are in this process, okay? And so maybe it's also not you as the teacher, but remember some students will read a book because it's a peer who they care about as well. And so giving students the time and space to book talk as well can be incredibly valuable. So all of that being said, I'm going to book talk a picture book today, and it's a picture book that we're actually going to read as well. So I want to book talk this first. But then after I book talk this book, we will actually do a different activity. So don't confuse the book talk with the movement from reading into writing. So I don't know if that's important to point out, but in a second, I'm going to do a book talk for this book. And so let me do that. Let me get settled here. All right, y'all. Good afternoon. Today, I want to start class with a book that I love. And this book is a book that I originally picked out to read with my 4 going on 5-year-old son, Hawthorne. Hawthorne and I love to read every night before bed, and it's one of his favorite things to do, and it's one of my favorite things to do. And I remember seeing this book in a bookstore, and I just thought to myself, the cover itself, as you can kind of see, is really quite incredible. This book is called The Sound of Silence. And I was just captivated because you can see the front and the back is sort of one large, almost like mosaic picture of a street scene where everything's in black and white except for this young man. And I didn't really know what it was about, but the other thing I knew is that it had a really cool title, The Sound of Silence. And I didn't know what was meant by that, but all I knew was that it was the title of a song by Simon and Garfunkel that I really liked as well. Perhaps some of you are familiar with The Sound of Silence. It's a really great song. And so I thought to myself, what a neat experience it would be to read this song, read this book, and then sort of share the music with my son. He was less interested in the song, and he did like the book though. So it's a book that sometimes every once in a while he picks up and reads with me. And it's by Katrina Goldsaito and Julia Kuo, 2 authors of picture books that I'm not as familiar with. But I loved it. And when I opened it up at the bookstore too, I just thought that the artwork was fascinating. You can see there's just large splashes of color, and it's a really wonderful way of just looking at different cultures. And given the fact that we are experiencing some issues with anti-Asian prejudice and discrimination and just some racial issues, I thought that this was a good book to share with you today, because one of the best things I think texts can do is give us windows and mirrors. And of course, when it gives us a window into a different culture, I think it humanizes people to make it so that we're less likely to be as discriminatory as perhaps we have been lately. And so as a result of that, I thought that it would be interesting to share a story about a young Japanese boy, because I think it's a moment in time when we can really do a little bit more exploration of different cultures. And so what I would like to do is share with you a passage from the text. And so it starts off with this young man, and it's a rainy day, and he's walking through a marketplace in Japan, and you can kind of see it here. And he just hears all of these sounds. He hears the sound of the rain squishing under his boots, landing on top of his umbrella. He can hear people in the marketplace hawking their wares and those types of things. And so he hears all of these sounds, but then he stumbles upon a sound that is really quite unfamiliar to him. And the young man's name is Yoshio. And so he says, "Sensei," Yoshio said, "do you have a favorite sound?" "The most beautiful sound," the koto player said, "is the sound of ma, silence." "Silence?" Yoshio asked. But the koto player just smiled a mysterious smile and went back to playing. And so I'll show you the image here. And really, this is a poignant moment in the book, because this is what sets Yoshio off onto a journey to figure out what this koto player was talking about the sound of silence. What does that even mean? What would that even sound like? And so the rest of the book is a journey for him to try to figure out if he can find silence in all of the places where he exists. And so if you want to find out whether or not Yoshio finds silence, you will have to pick up this book. And so I'll put it over here in the classroom, and if you're interested, you can pick it up then.